was smuggled into this country by my mother, who was a coyote. And a coyote is a people smuggler. She wasn't one. At the time, there weren't a lot of women doing this kind of work, and even now, like, you don't really hear about a lot of coyotes. And my mother was a special kind of coyote because she had absolutely no sense of direction. None. My mother couldn't tell you how to get from point A to point B to get to C. And that was really important because in the coyote, you really look to coyotes to give you a sense of direction. But what she did have is she knew where she wanted to get to. She had somewhere in mind for herself. And if you know where you want to get to, you don't need a map. You don't need a plan. You don't need much, she told me. What you do need is a sense of destination to project yourself forward. And then you just let everything else work itself out. You become a map maker. You become the author of your life and your destiny. So while most kids at the age of 6 were learning to ride bicycles or they were playing with their microscope sets, at 6, I was taking chicken buses from Bananera to Guatemala City to Tecunguman. I was hopping on trains with my family to get to Mexico City, to Juarez, and then we were hitchhiking. We were hitchhiking on semis so that we could get into El Paso, Texas, and then Dallas. And then from there, you might have taken one of these before. I fell asleep. I would fall asleep most of the way, my mother said, on the back of a Greyhound bus all the way to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's right, Hershey Park area. And we trekked 4,070 miles. And it wasn't uncommon at some point during that trip for my mother to turn to me and say, "Mija," my daughter, "are we going north or south?" We did this trip so many times to bring our family here. And when we were all here, our trip didn't end. We became part of an invisible workforce in the United States. We became undocumented immigrants. Our journey wasn't even a single journey. It just became one map after the next. For the rest of my childhood, I spent between chicken plants, textile and toy factories, and we would be at flea markets on weekends selling cheap perfume and pirated CDs of Freddie Fender. Worse, we would also be selling pirated CDs of really bad banda music in like half a dozen states. And so what ended up happening is that I felt very displaced from my geography. At school, none of the kids knew where Guatemala was, much less this place, Bananera, Banana Town, the United Fruit Company labor town where I was born. No idea. And it really didn't matter, because in the end, in 6 months, I would be somewhere else. The geographies was so fluid. It was like the scenes that you see when you're on a train. One thing just leads to the next, and you negotiate the borders as you go. In 1987, former President Ronald Reagan signed into law the Immigration and Reform Act, Control Act, and we were very fortunate because we won the lottery, basically. We were in the lottery and we got our papers, our real papers. And that meant that I could enroll in undergraduate, I could apply to scholarships. Did I get rid of my fake papers? No way. I still slept with them underneath my pillow, and I would still hear my grandmother in my head. This is how often I heard my grandmother say this to me, saying in Spanish, igual como la migra te dieron los papeles, así te los pueden quitar. Just like ICE gave you those papers, it can also take them away. So, not your papers, not your job, not your country, not your home, nothing could be pinned down for very long. And so, in this state of flux, I learned to adapt quickly. I learned to appreciate facts and to fail quickly because I didn't have the time or the luxury to to basically get stuck in places. And so you learn those lessons, you move on. I also learned to value sources that could give me really reliable, true, useful information, because that information would keep my mother and I alive. And my mom and I got really good at finding information. We would find information about health screenings. We would find where the food bank was giving food different times of the week. We would do Medicaid, Medicare, public housing. We would find the day jobs and be able to give those to our family and our friends. We got so good at this. People would just come to us and they would ask us to help navigate those bureaucracies. Maps are a metaphor for me. If you do a search on Flickr, which I love to do, I just love staring at maps, they represent all kinds of experiences. For my mother, I was her co-pilot in a pre-GPS era. There was no Siri back then. I was actually using hard maps. And I had to learn how to navigate us through new cities and new streets and get us out quickly without leaving a trace. We were unseen. And what this interweaving of cities and all these experiences that I had in my life taught me is that there's a multiplicity of journeys, people's lives that represent these cultural and personal geographies that we all create and we identify with. These geographies are interwoven. They're connected to each other the way, when you look at a map and you see the little streets that lead to the bigger streets or the bigger thoroughfares, those thoroughfares also take us further beyond places that we're familiar with, to new destinations, to new experiences, to new people, and those things help us grow. This map that points to my stories is not uncommon for other immigrants in this country who also carry their maps and their stories. More than physical geographies, what we learn is to navigate and negotiate these borderless terrains of how we're going to form our identities and how we can actually author our lives. When you think about these maps, a lot of times we're not even aware that there are maps. We don't really take ownership of them in the beginning. And so it's a process just to get to that ownership. For myself, when I think about my map and I think about all the places I've been and all the people that I've met and the experiences and all these objects, and I am kind of a hoarder of things, and all these resiliencies layered upon each other, I think of how we are a collection of everything that we experience, all the people that we know, and that these maps also connect with other people's maps. These maps also, a lot of times when you're going through these experiences, they kind of seem random. You're like, why did this happen to me? Or why did I do that? But there actually is a reason for why you do certain things that you do. And for myself, although these experiences were or seemed random, they did imprint themselves into me and they helped lead me to my destination. I became a health researcher, a community organizer. I did a lot of work just working in the fields, helping to reduce just different risks for immigrants. I also ended up being an actress. Yes, that's actually a picture when I did a soap opera in Taiwan called We Have No Future Together. I was, ironically enough. And I also did a lot of poetry, and I ended up also doing journalism. And all the story making and map making led me into journalism, but I was always a communicator. And that gets to a larger point that we are always trying to find ways to chart the things that happen in our lives and the people that we meet and experiences that we have, and to make meaning of those things. And what I want to give you today is the legend that I've created for my map. And I hope that it will be helpful to you. Number one, when you make a map, it doesn't actually have to be unidirectional. It can be multi-directional. So in that way, it's like a footpath, like that you're hiking. And so there is no really right or wrong, there is no real north or south. In the end, wherever you are is where you need to be. Like Shakespeare says, by misdirection, do direction find. That's where you need to be. Be present where you are and move forward from that point. Number two, maps can be part of other maps. And those maps point to stories. And those stories can be part of your story. And all those stories together can help you find your way and can help other people find their way. It's a collective storytelling, but it's also a collective meaning making that you're part of. Number three, these maps, you've seen some maps that are really boring looking, but there are like a lot of, like if you see the heat maps and all these other kinds of maps, these maps are actually for you. You can do your map, you can make your map any way that you want. The point is that it has to make sense to you, and it has to help you navigate your life and your terrain. So there are some points in your life that you may have gone through that had more impact, or some people that you met that had more influence. You can represent that in your map. The point is, it's yours. Use it. Craft it any way you want. My map is constantly changing. I have no idea what I'm going to do once I graduate. I don't need to know. I trust that whatever I'm going to do is going to get me to where I know I want to get to. And I want to understand and tell the stories of people who have been unseen, of the periphery, of people who have gone through the challenges that my family and I have gone through. And whatever my job title is doing that isn't important to me. This is a picture from some story that I did with Al Jazeera on unaccompanied minors. And that young man in the middle did want to be seen. He said he was tired of being unseen. My map has taken me from Bananera, Guatemala, to the Ivory Tower at American University, where I'm doing my doctorate. And yes, I still use sticky notes. And what I want to tell you today is you don't need a map. It's contradictory to everything that's being said to you. You don't need a map, you don't need a plan. My mother didn't need a map, and neither do I. What you do need is to be present in your life. Breathe into your life every moment, and project from there where you need to be. My mother reminded me that when you want something, there are no borders. You will find a way to get through. The path will reveal itself when you become your own map maker and the author of your life and your destiny. Thank you.